All right, we are live. Good Friday evening, everybody. Hope you're doing well. We have so many things to start. That's why we are talking. That's why we're starting a little bit early here. I'm just getting some stuff ready. I hope you're doing well. As always, remember you could support the channel by going to patreon.com/Hement, and you could subscribe to my articles by going right there, which you should do. You can do that for free right now. And a quick note that next week I'll probably be doing this Thursday night, not Friday night. So I hope you'll be there then. Okay, where do we begin? I figured we will talk first about a topic I don't even really want to talk about. I had no intention of discussing all that transphobic stuff that Jerry Coyne wrote about a while back. But here's the story in case you missed it when I discussed it like a week or two ago. Basically, in short, I made like an hour-long video about this last week or the week before about how Jerry Coyne, the biologist and well-known atheist, give or take, had written an article that was completely transphobic. In that piece, in addition to arguing that sex is binary, which it's not, he also said trans women were more likely to be sexual predators. That's not true. He said trans women should not be allowed to counsel women who have been physically abused because they are trans. Apparently, it doesn't matter what degrees you have. If you make other people uncomfortable, you shouldn't be allowed to have certain jobs, which is just straight up bigotry. He also argued there's no chance that any trans woman should be allowed to play women's sports at any age. He also said trans women should not be placed in women's prisons if that were to happen, even though the alternatives to that have been shown to be disastrous. So it wasn't just that he's arguing the biology of trans people. He was basically just saying a lot of anti-trans stuff. And he did this on the Freedom from Religion Foundation's website. And they're a group that should know better than to post stuff like that. And again, I made another video where I discussed everything wrong with what FFRF did and why that article should not have been there. And I also explained that really quickly after that article went up and people complained about it, FFRF took it down. They stated that, hey, as a group, we're sorry. We shouldn't have done. Well, actually, they did not say we're sorry, but they said we made a mistake and we do support LGBTQ rights. They said posting that piece was an error of judgment and it did not reflect their values. And before long, Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker had all resigned from their honorary titles on Freedom from Religion Foundation's honorary board of directors, which is a thing no one knew existed until they decided it meant something. Now, here's the new stuff that maybe you haven't seen yet, because this week, in the wake of that whole controversy, a whole slew of atheist, secular, humanist organizations, they posted this, which I found to be really wonderful. This is a statement from American-based atheist, humanist, free thought, and secular groups affirming their support for LGBTQ rights. Because even though this thing I'm talking about did not concern all these other groups, they wanted to go ahead and say, we understand that trans rights are under attack today because of religious zealots acting on their religious faith and a bunch of so-called like biologists who use faulty logic to defend anti-trans policies. And I want to show you one thing in this letter that I found really interesting. Look at this. Here we go. We will not permit religious extremists to foment a moral panic, encourage harassment or violence, and enact dangerous policies that seek to force LGBTQ plus Americans generally and trans Americans in particular out of public life and out of existence. Nor will we sit silently or ignore when the talking points, misinformation, and outright fabrications of anti-LGBTQ plus extremists are laundered and given a veneer of legitimacy or acceptability by those who hold themselves out as voices of reason or science. So they don't mention Jerry Coyne or Richard Dawkins or Pinker, but the subtext is very clear here. They're not going to stand by while like the people who are prominent atheists perpetuate the same attacks on trans people. So this is a really good statement. I think it's important that they put this out there, and I appreciate it. These unworkable, ill-conceived, and plainly discriminatory laws and policies are about one thing: forcing a regressive, largely religious view of gender norms onto the American people. And at the very end here, we cannot and will not ignore such bigotry, no matter its source, even if it comes from well-known atheists. Well, look at who signed on to this. American Atheists. I think it's important to name these groups. This is good. American Atheists, Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers, American Humanist Association, Recovering from Religion, Association of Secular Elected Officials, Secular Student Alliance, Black Nonbelievers, Secular Coalition for America, Camp Quest, Secular Woman, The Clergy Project, Society for Humanistic Judaism, Freedom from Religion Foundation. They kind of helped start this whole shenanigans. And so good on them for signing on to this. The Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association, the Free Thought Society, and the Hispanic American Freethinkers. Good on them. 16 groups. That's a positive sign that these groups understand that LGBTQ rights and promoting atheism, these are not separate lanes. If you say you're an atheist organization, you do not have to ignore the ramifications of Christian policies in our government, because those Christian policies right now are going after LGBTQ people, specifically trans people. They are trying to block reproductive freedom in America. And also, if you want to play this game, I mean, a lot of the racist shit that Republicans are trying to do stem from religious views about what ought to happen there too. It's not just them, but religion is a part of this. So if you're an atheist organization that cares about more than just does God exist, but what happens if you believe in God and you want church-state separation, you have to pay attention to these issues. You have to care about these issues. So that's amazing that these groups put out that statement. Now, what groups did not sign that statement? One group in particular has a pretty wide reach and did not sign that statement, and that group is the Center for Inquiry, which also happens to be the group that merged with Richard Dawkins' Foundation for Reason and Science a few years ago. And this is the group that has been more anti-trans than any other group out there in recent years. Just to give you some examples, under the leadership of their CEO, Robin Blumner, this group has condemned LGBTQ rights. They condemned doctors who work with trans kids. In an essay from Blumner, she wrote, "I hope their malpractice insurance is paid up. They're going to need it." That's for doctors who help kids get gender-affirming care. Not surgery necessarily, just gender-affirming care. She also downplayed racism in America, like it doesn't exist anymore because Barack Obama got elected and Clarence Thomas is on the Supreme Court. So if you're looking for an organization that says the dumbest shit imaginable that also claims to be an atheist organization, I mean, there you are. This is the group for you, because there's, you know, that old statement about like, you want to think critically, you want to open up your mind, but also you don't want to open it up so much that your brain falls out. Well, this is a group that opened their mind so much the brain fell out, right? But here's why I bring them up. It's not just that they didn't sign on to this statement. It is that today, January 17th, they released a statement of their own in rebuttal to the statement saying we support LGBTQ rights. A rebuttal to that. It did not need a rebuttal. Saying, hey, we also think trans people are human. I don't know why you think you need to post a rebuttal to it, but that is what the Center for Inquiry did. And this, like, where does it get bad? I will help you with that. It gets bad right from the beginning. This is the headline. Response to secular groups that claim scientists are shills for Christian nationalism, which is not a thing anybody said ever. The argument that some people, like myself, were making is that when Jerry Coyne goes on these anti-trans tirades, you are pushing Christian nationalist talking points about trans people. You are helping Christian nationalists, their agenda get enacted. Why do you think there are some states pushing bathroom bills? Why do you think there are some states that are trying to pass bans on trans kids playing sports? It's because of BS arguments like the ones these dudes are parroting. But that doesn't mean scientists are shills for Christian nationalism. Just scientists who say really stupid stuff. So right off the bat with the headline, CFI gets everything wrong. But then it gets worse. Let's go through this letter because it's just really awful. Okay? Let's see. Where do we go from here? The Center for Inquiry stands for Reason Science. Who cares about that first paragraph? CFI spends the beginning of this letter telling you how amazing CFI is. We are often the speakers of inconvenient truths, like God doesn't exist, you're not going to see anyone in heaven, etc. And by the way, I have said this before, but I think this is important. I think guys like Richard Dawkins, why does it feel like they only post this anti-science, anti-trans stuff these days? My hypothesis here is that when they got famous as new atheists, the thing that they took away from that is if everyone believes something and I tell them they are wrong, and in 20 years ago that was about the question of God, then everyone will see me as a rebel, as someone who is willing to state the obvious, as a guy willing to say the emperor has no clothes. And that is what I'm really good at, telling you you're wrong about something, even though most people believe in it. And the thing is, I really enjoyed that at the time because they happened to be right about God. But their takeaway is if I'm a contrarian about anything, people are going to love me. And I think CFI has fallen for that too. Like sometimes, if everyone, most people believe something, it doesn't mean it's wrong. And when you say everyone's wrong about this, that doesn't make you right. Being a contrarian isn't a virtue. If you have facts to back you up, that would help. But in any case, we are the speakers of inconvenient truths. And that is true. Sometimes they can be. Lately, there has been a disagreement among secular groups with regard to transgender activism. And let's stop there for a second. No, this is not a disagreement. A disagreement is, what percent of wealthy people's, how much should wealthy people get taxed? Should it be like 90% or 91%? That's a good disagreement we can have. If the argument is, are trans people people? Should they have civil rights? No, we're not having a polite disagreement. This is not subject to debate. You're just wrong on this. So no, there is no disagreement. Also, with regard to transgender activism, I get so pissed off about this when people say that if you support trans rights, you are thereby an activist. Like, I dare these people to name an openly trans person who is not an activist, right? Sarah McBride just got elected to Congress or got sworn into Congress. She is a representative from, oh my God, where is it? Like Virginia. And she is trans. And she has said repeatedly that she's not an activist. She just wants to be a good representative for her people. And honestly, I believe that because she's absolutely not an activist. Even at times when she could be a voice for trans people, she is out there saying, I'm not their spokesperson. I am just here trying to do a good job. And you can respect that or you can be frustrated by that. But the point is, not all trans people are activists, and not everyone who supports trans rights and calls out bullshit when it comes to trans people are activists about it. there are trans activists. Like, who's an atheist activist? Not everyone who's an atheist is an activist about it. Some people are just atheists. And with these people, like CFI, I don't think they're able to admit there are just some people pissed off about the fact that CFI is lying about this stuff who are frustrated with the lies, and they are not trans activists. But they just paint everyone as out to get them because they are trans activists, and no, they are not. So stop treating everybody as if they're like organizing and out to get you. Just take the L. You screwed up, CFI. They won't admit that. But okay, what is this disagreement they have? Biological science indicates that there are two biological sexes, a fact consistent throughout the animal world of which humans are a part. Nice admission that creationism is not true there, but no, there isn't. There is no science that says there are two. It's bimodal. It's not binary. And the funny thing is, when I have heard guys like Dawkins and Coyne talk about all this stuff, and I have sat through their stupid lectures, even they admit there are exceptions to the rule, but instead of accepting that there are exceptions to the rule, even if it's a tiny percentage, they're like, yeah, but the exceptions don't really count, so let's just say there are two biological sexes. And then they just move on as if they didn't say the thing they said. Like, a sexual binary is so simplistic. I'm not the expert. You shouldn't listen to me about that. Go read up about the topic from people who know far more about this. Okay, I've done that. Apparently, the guys like Dawkins and Coyne have not, because they think they're right about everything. And more to the point, the politicians who craft policy about trans people, do you think they care about whether sex is binary or not? No, they just want to harm trans people, just like all their anti-gay stuff was out to harm gay people. They didn't care about what's going on in your brain. They just said, this is a group my religious voters don't like, so I'm going to pass policy to make their lives miserable. And Coyne and Dawkins do not care about that. They don't think about that. They just don't care. So discussing biology, to CFI's point, look at this. When public policy is enacted, it should be sensitive to the former as well as the latter. Well, then why isn't CFI out there saying trans rights matter? And why aren't they pushing against the bans and the bathroom bills and all that stuff? Because they don't care, right? The thing is, it's not, I don't think discussing biology is transphobic. If you want to argue and discuss biology, fine. But spreading misinformation about trans people under the guise of science, which is the thing that Jerry Coyne did multiple times, that is transphobic. That should be called out. That is very harmful. And I would hope secular atheist scientists are smart enough to know when they are being used to advance Christian nationalism, right? So you would hope somewhere in this letter, this statement from Center for Inquiry, maybe they would say, okay, Jerry Coyne was right about the biology, but he was wrong to say the thing about trans people being sex predators. And he was wrong about saying they shouldn't be allowed to have certain jobs for which they would be qualified. Nope. They didn't mention his name. They didn't mention all the horrible things he said that were untrue. They just dismissed all that. Because, of course, that's what you do when you're just strawmanning all of your opponents by calling them trans activists. What else did CFI say in this dumb letter? Okay. They went on to say certain examples when we should be able to discuss trans people without making a big deal about it. Here's one example. For instance, if there is a medical clinical trial for women to determine if a medication has a different impact on women than men, should trans women participate? If trans women are to be considered the same as natal women, the answer is yes, they should participate. However, science suggests otherwise because they're not biologically the same. Saying as much doesn't make you a tool of Christian nationalism. What the hell are they talking about? You know what? Yes, actually, if there's a medical trial and we want to learn how medication works on different people, including people who may have different hormone levels, yeah, trans people should participate in that. And we, as a society, would be better off with that information at our disposal. Like, how broken does your brain have to be to say, you know what would make science even better? Less information. That's CFI's position here. Like, we should just never find out how trans women might respond to a certain medication. I don't understand that from a science point of view, but that's one dumb thing they said. Here's another one. They also talked about sports. And here's what they said there. There are other places where the biology of sex has a significant role to play, in sports, for instance. Once male puberty has occurred, it is no longer fair physiologically for whoever has benefited from it to compete in almost any category of women's sports. And by the way, let's be clear, they're only ever talking about trans women and never trans men because they haven't gotten that far in their research yet. But look, if fairness is all that matters to them, there are players who are obscenely tall. Should we ban them from basketball, even if they're cisgender, because they have an unfair advantage, right? No, we would say, no, Victor Wembanyama is a freak of nature, but we like watching him play. This makes it more entertaining. We don't say he should be banned because he's way taller than everybody else. If Michael Phelps is swimming in the Olympics and his body makes no sense on paper because he has all these benefits that make him swim faster, we don't say he should not be allowed to compete because of natural things that make him better. Like, no one says that about cis people who are gifted in certain ways in their sports. Here's another thing that bothers me about CFI's position here. How many trans athletes do they think there are? Because if you think trans women have this competitive advantage in everything, then you would see trans women dominating pretty much every sport. You do not see that. You know why you don't see that? Because where did I get this information from? This is from the New York Times. I want to show you this here if I could find it. There are, oh my God, I want to find this number and I can't find it. Of course. There are over 500,000 NCAA athletes. 500,000. 10 of them are openly trans. That was a couple years ago. I think it may be a little higher now. But we're talking such a small, actual raw number of trans athletes at the college level that this should not even come up for conversation. It's virtually nobody. In Utah, I think late last year, Republicans passed a bill banning trans athletes in schools. And guess how many people that ban applied to? Literally one kid who played in high school, I believe. One. And all of these professional leagues have their own rules about eligibility, and none of those rules are show me your chromosomes. It has to do with hormone levels and things like that. So again, the only reason I point that out, this idea that it's unfair for trans people to compete in women's sports by the sole basis being that they are trans makes absolutely no sense. And the fact that CFI is just perpetuating this is awful. And then they went into transitioning, which is like the right wing's favorite talking point here. In light of the latest research and actions by several European countries that have stepped back from such medical interventions, the way gender affirming care is practiced in the United States is no longer universally accepted as the most beneficial approach. There are increasing numbers of detransitioners, whether transgender activists want to believe it or not. And those stories can be just as heartbreaking as the stories of trans identifying children seeking medical intervention. Jesus. Okay. A lot of this stems from the UK's CAS review, which you can look this up online. How many scientists have said there are flaws with this report that has been taken as gospel by the right-wing government that used to run the UK? In fact, I think just this past week, France put out a statement. This is a story about it from Aaron Reed, the journalist. France just released a statement from the French Society of Pediatric Endocrinology and Diabetology, has released what is being called the first French national medical consensus on trans youth care. Bottom line, the new guidelines recommend trans youth care, denounce a wait-and-see approach for trans adolescents, and promote individualized care for every trans patient. That's wonderful. But that goes against all this stuff that CFI is talking about, that the latest research says we should not help trans kids. They also say gender affirming care is practiced in the US. That's no longer universally accepted as beneficial. They make it sound like the US is super gender affirming. It is not. You have to try really hard to find a doctor willing to work with you at that point. But what are we talking about here? Most of the kids, most of the youth who are getting trans-related care, they're not getting surgery. They're not even getting hormone treatment. They're getting to talk to someone about what changes they should be expecting along the way, what's going on. They want to talk to someone about it. Whatever medicine they are taking, these are not permanent interventions. And this stupid idea that we need to listen to the people who said they were trans and transitioned and then regretted it, that is a small fraction of people who have done that. And this is a script we've seen before, because guess what? When we were having conversations about people coming out as gay, there were a lot of Christians. And I know this because their videos pop up on like Christian YouTube. Like, I thought I was gay, but then I found my wife and I realized I'm straight. Like, you'll see a ton of those videos. And it's like, okay, man, if that was your journey, so be it. But we should not base policy off of your ignorance. Just because you didn't know yourself and you felt pressured or something, that is not justification for us to deny rights to all these other people who got it right. And there are plenty of sources that say people do not regret intervention like this. This is a paper published by PubMed, National Library of Medicine. Where was this published? In LGBT Health, the journal. But look at this. They research people who had transitioned and who detransitioned. And they said of those who had detransitioned, 82% reported at least one external factor, meaning they transitioned and then went back. And they said, basically, society is being mean to me. I don't like the way people are reacting to me. That's an external pressure. Only 15.9% of respondents reported an internal driving factor, like, I was wrong about this. So even among detransitioners, the number of people who want to go back because they realize they were wrong about this is actually a tiny fraction of transitioners as well. And again, even if they're wrong about this, no one's pressuring people to get surgery before they're ready for it. Unless you're CFI and you think that's what's happening everywhere all the time. Like, they make it sound like, you know what? There was a gay person who said they were gay and then they realized they were not gay. And because of that person's existence, we should just change all public policy to make sure no gay people have rights. That's where CFI is on this. It makes no sense at all. So where do they go from here? Where do they take this? Here's the end of this piece. To elide past these complex issues that CFI has gotten completely wrong and claim that only one side involves civil and human rights is simply wrong. Natal women athletes have civil rights as well. Children have human rights that include not having permanent disabling surgeries before they truly understand the consequences. Well, guess what? As someone who is not a trans activist, I'm here to tell you, no one is suggesting kids should have surgery before they're ready for it. No one is saying women athletes should not have rights. They do. Their rights are not taken away by the existence of trans people. It is not pie. Just because someone has some rights doesn't take away from yours. What the hell are they talking about? Like, no one is saying one side is for civil and human rights and the other side is wrong. It's that you're wrong because you keep telling people lies. provable lies, and you are defending it in the name of science. What else does CFI say here? If any crack of daylight between one's point of view and that of the most extreme transgender activist, Jesus, they cannot imagine a trans person who's not an activist. And anyone, I think they think I'm an extreme trans activist. And I'm like, no, I read the stuff about trans people and I think human rights are good. I don't get these people. If any crack of daylight between one's point of view and that of the most extreme trans activist is considered hateful bigotry and shall not be uttered without fear of cancellation, then that is a place where reason and science have disappeared, and all that remains is vitriol, anger, and self-righteousness. That won't happen at CFI. Uh-huh. Very powerful statement there. Basically saying, we're going to keep lying about trans people, and if you call us out on it, you are canceling us, and how dare you happen? How dare you allow that to happen? I like this ending too. We strongly disagree with people or groups who think discussion is dangerous. No one said that. Biology is bigotry. No one said that. And science is Christian nationalism in disguise. We definitely did not say that. But spreading Christian nationalist lies in the name of science does help Christian nationalists. Like, this is from CFI. This is from a group that has been around for decades and decades. I think I've said this before. Just after I graduated from college, I did an internship at CFI. I will admit, I didn't really get anything out of it. That's not a knock on them. I think they just weren't ready for interns. But I had a good time there. I learned quite a bit. I enjoyed my time there. It was under different management at the time. I'm pretty sure like 1% of the staff has remained from when I was there. But like, this is an organization that has done a lot of good. I think people who are younger than me, like low 40s, me, I think if you're younger, you don't realize that there was a time when you couldn't really get a lot of information about atheism because the internet wasn't out there. The books about atheism were written for college graduates and not lay people. And at the time, the only way you might find out about any of this stuff is by maybe going to the library because they had some of CFI's magazines. And for a lot of people I've met who are older than me, that is one of the ways they first came into contact with the ideas of skepticism and atheism and stuff like that. So this organization means something to a lot of people, especially older people. And for them to do this weird, I wouldn't say 180, but like 179, and say, yes, we are still for science and reason. And also we're going to just go against woke. And that's our mission statement now. It's just wild to me. It makes you wonder what the hell their board is doing, what their staff is doing at this point. I did speak today to a few people who are far more knowledgeable about these specific issues than I am. And one of the things that Jillian Brodus is someone who was actually a plaintiff for a lawsuit that CFI filed in 2016 when the state of Illinois would not allow secular celebrants to perform weddings. And Jillian said to me, on every level, Robin Blumner has constructed a straw man of what other secular groups have stated, what trans people have been fighting for, and frankly, the science itself. CFI is contributing to the normalization of the same pseudoscience that Christian nationalists are using to further justify marginalizing trans people like me. And I think that says a lot. If CFI wants to be like the safe space for people who have really dumb views, okay, fine. I'm not saying all of you need to run away from the organization either, because it's not like there are so many different atheist organizations that do this type of work. What I am saying is if you are still a member of that organization for some reason, you should let them know if you have a problem with what they're doing. Because I think, I don't know the answer to this. I wonder how much of the revenue CFI generates is just legacy. It's from old people that used to like that magazine 20 years ago, and they've just kept becoming members, renewing their membership ever since. I don't know how many people are aware that this is what the organization stands for now. I don't know how many new members they have coming into the fold. because they would do pretty well if they retained like 75% of their membership from the past. But if you are a member, go let them know you have a problem with this. My understanding is they're about to put out one of their magazines in the next week or two that's dedicated to the trans debate. So, like, it's just going to get worse. And if they're not going to change their leadership or their staff, and they're not going to change their board members, then none of this is going to change. And again, I'm going to go back to the beginning here. Freedom from Religion Foundation made a mistake by posting Jerry Coyne's essay, and their members let them know about it, and they quickly reversed course, admitted to some extent that they screwed up, and they have since signed on to these letters reaffirming their support for LGBTQ rights. And it remains to be seen how they're actually going to implement that idea in practice. But you can bet people are going to be holding their feet to the fire about it. I don't know if CFI's membership just doesn't know or doesn't care about any of this stuff, but it's really disturbing. And I think people should speak out about it. I don't know. I think that's all for now. Let's stop there and let's take some questions. As an atheist trans person, transphobic rhetoric is always irritating. Hearing the other groups disapprove of pushing it is good. I agree. I think it's important. I think right now, one of the biggest issues that Christian nationalism is going all in on is making life miserable for LGBTQ people, specifically trans people. And that is coming from a place of religion. So if you're an atheist group or a church-state separation group, none of these groups say God doesn't exist and now we're done. We have no other reason for existing. Even American atheists, you would think that's kind of their whole game, has said like, we care about atheism, but also what happens as a consequence of that. And that for them means promoting church-state separation, for example. Well, guess what? Church-state separation is under attack. And this is one of the ways the religious right is doing it, by going after trans people. So if you care about the logical extensions of your atheism, then this ought to be an issue that you care about, just like abortion should be an issue that you care about. And if you care about it, that means you're familiar with it and you know the arguments about it, and you're willing to speak out against the idiots who are pushing anti-trans rhetoric in the name of science, like Coyne and Dawkins and Michael Shermer and Peter Boghossian and all these guys. The inconvenient truth here would be that gender is not binary, and the understanding of how humans experience and express their gender is extremely varied and cannot be neatly placed in a box. That is true. And look, it might be hard to explain. It's not an easy topic to try to explain to people who know nothing about it. But this happens all the time, trying to get people to understand evolution, which maybe at its core is simple, but to really understand it, it takes a little bit of thought and research, and you might need to read a book about it and stuff like that. And yet, I feel like in our community, no one's ever let that get in our way. We're excited about that. We want you to understand it. And we praise the people who are really good at explaining that stuff. Do you remember during COVID when the vaccines were coming out and there were TikToks and all that from people trying to explain how these vaccines worked and why they were able to get out in like record time, even though they were safe and had been tested? Like, you love videos like that because it's science made easy to understand. And these guys should be in a position where their expertise meets the moment. They could be voices of reason, able to explain in really lucid prose what's going on with trans people and why this is not against biology, but rather a beautiful extension of it. And they've just given up. And they're like, nah, it's just easier to say trans people are lying to themselves. Like, where are the science communicators when we need them? Or at least, where did these science communicators go? There are plenty of ones who do a really good job about this today, but it's just not them. By the way, France and Australia rejected the CAST review and did their own research. Thank you. That proved that gender-affirming care is the sole and only effective and safe treatment for trans people, including minors. Yes, and I did mention the France one. I did not mention the Australian one. But yes, this is the point. The people who actually researched it and didn't go in with an agenda, when they looked at it, they're like, you know what we should try? We should try helping trans kids. And it's good. All right. So where's that one? How come we're not pushing those papers, CFI, if you care about research and science? I think these dudes realize that they're bogus, do they? But they see the writing on the wall and realize they're losing relevance. And what better way to stay relevant than to jump on the anti-trans bandwagon? You know, I don't know if they realize they're bogus. I think uh, they are so in a bubble. Like, I'm pretty sure these guys are all on email chains with each other. And so when one of them says, "You guys, I just got canceled for my anti-trans views. Who's with me?" Then the other dudes all chime in like, "I am Spartacus. I will denounce trans people as well." And so they just do that. And because they have spent their entire lives, think about Pinker, think about Dawkins. They have spent the majority of their adult lives being known as public intellectuals. Like, they are known for walking into a room and everyone telling them how smart and brilliant they are. And on this issue, they are idiots. But they don't have anyone left who's willing to tell them they're dumb on this. And if someone does, they're just like, "You're attacking me. I'm brilliant. Everyone tells me I'm brilliant." So I don't know that they're trying to stay relevant, other than they found an issue where the people they don't like are the ones calling them out on it. And they don't seem to understand that when, MAGA cultists are the ones saying, "You know what Richard Dawkins says?" Like, I have seen Christian pastors use Richard Dawkins as an example of why we should be against trans rights. And the fact that that doesn't bother Richard Dawkins is troubling to me. Right? Like, so I don't know if I don't know what's going on in their minds. I think they really do think they're right about this. And once again, they're the contrarians in the room fighting against the grain. And if you know what, people said they were wrong about atheism, they were right about it. People are now telling them they're wrong about trans people, but they're right about it. And no, they're just wrong. But now they've decided all of them are victims of like woke culture. So they just decided wokeism is bad. It's totally idiotic, but there you go. All right. I'm going to move to a different story. Give me 1 second here um to pull this up, and hopefully we'll never have to talk about Jerry Coyne again. We'll see. All right. This is a weird story as well. Let me tell you the backstory on this. Like, maybe a month, maybe 2 months ago, a friend of mine sent me a paper that was published in a research journal, specifically like a Christian research journal. And I saw the headline and I'm like, well, this is not going to be a good paper. And I skimmed through it and I'm like, there's a lot going on here. And I feel like if I'm supposed to debunk this, I don't know if I want to read through this lengthy paper with a lot of jargon. I don't do research. So a lot of this is meant, it's above my head, right? And then, like a month later, I began to see actual articles written about this paper and how wrong it was. And I'm like, let me give that another shot. Let me look at that paper again. And I realized, wait a minute, this isn't as jargon filled as I thought. Someone like me can actually debunk this pretty easily. I don't even need to try that hard. And I want to share this with all of you now as well, because I'm going to show you the title of the paper. And when I show you the title of the paper, you're going to be like, uh-oh, this cannot be good. Here is the title of the paper. Here you go. Rape, Suicide, and the Rise of Religious Nuns. Okay, you're going to try to link these together. And this is written by Philip Truscott of Southwest Baptist University in Missouri. So this dude, this professor at a Christian college, this researcher, is trying to show you there is a link between those three areas. And again, I mean, instinctively, no, there isn't. So what's he going to do? This was published, by the way, in something called the Journal of Sociology and Christianity, which is a Christian journal. And here's what this dude tried to do. He wanted to find a link between those three things I just mentioned. The problem is you don't actually get really good data at like a granular level about, religious demographics and sexual assault numbers and rates of suicide. things like that. So he tried getting state level numbers so that he could try and compare and contrast and do all that stuff. And his argument is that, well, if you look at the rates of sexual assault reporting and self-proclaimed nuns, non-religious people, well, the graphs look kind of similar. And therefore, I'm going to go ahead and draw a conclusion. He argues basically that a rise in non-religiosity has led to a loss of self-control, and that atheism is therefore, and he said this in the paper, a plausible mechanism driving both increased rape and suicide. He says atheism is a mechanism for more of those two things. He doesn't say being an atheist causes it. He just says, these graphs all point in the same direction, and isn't that very interesting? And if you've ever taken a basic statistics course, like, what do you learn on day one? Correlation is not causation. Correlation does not imply causation. Just because the graphs look similar and they're trending in the same way doesn't mean one thing caused the other. But this is basically what the guy does. Here's an example of what I'm talking about right here. Look at this graph that is included in his paper. This is the national rape reporting rate and the national non-affiliation rate by year. And look at the graphs. You can practically put them on top of each other. And isn't that strange? And then he looks at the national suicide rates mixed with the same thing. Here is that graph. I mean, those aren't even really similar, but you could see there was like a peak in 2018. And he's like, well, those are going in the same direction as well. And that's pretty much how this whole paper goes. Like, I'm not getting more granular than that because this guy doesn't get more granular than that. It's just a question of where's he getting his data from. But the fact is, he doesn't really have anything linking the two. So he's just cherry picking numbers wherever he can get them. Now, Religion News Service interviewed this guy about this paper. And this is interesting. What did he say about it? While he falls short of claiming that loss of religion causes more suicides and assault, Truscott has subsequently argued that his findings prove the need for more state vouchers for private schools, most of which are religious. Families that choose religious schools for their kids can play a role in reversing the decline of religion in America, which he argues will reduce the rate of suicide and campus sexual assaults. So this dude is like, I'm so right about this that we should have more money for private schools. So that's disturbing. I think some of you are saying this in the comments, but this is a fair point as well. One of the ways this guy got information about sexual assault is by using information provided to the government from college campuses. It's part of something called the Clary Act, and that is a proxy for assault allegations. But it never occurs to this guy that maybe campuses that have more religious diversity, because they are larger for a bunch of reasons, and they also are the same schools that probably have less organized religion, and that they also might be the same campuses where sexual assault is taken more seriously, which means more students can report it knowing their experiences will not be dismissed. On the flip side here, what about all the stories we have heard from very Christian campuses where a lot of women on those campuses know that if they come forward with stories about how they were allegedly assaulted, that might mean admitting they broke school rules regarding sex before marriage, or that maybe they got drunk, or maybe they stayed out past curfew. And so they have internalized the fact that if something happens to you, you do not report that stuff. I think I mentioned this the other week, but like there was an article written years ago where they basically summed it up this way. How do you report sexual assault at a place where authorities seem skeptical such a thing even exists? So at some level, if there are more reports of sexual assault, that's partly because new policies have made it a bit easier for victims to come forward, including at religious schools. But without any actual data linking religiosity with sexual assault, you would not say one causes, the former causes the latter, right? That would make no sense whatsoever. The funny thing is, I think this guy gets that too, because in this paper he wrote, I want to show you this. He actually said, where is the part I am looking for? Yes, right here. Check out this thing he wrote in the paper. Since more religious states might attach a greater social stigma to sexual behavior, victim blaming and correspondingly lower reporting rates might be the reason for lower apparent crime rates. Like, dude, you nailed it. You figured it out. That red states might not have higher crime rates because they've told women they should not be reporting this stuff. He says that in the paper, he admits it, and then he just continues on saying the opposite. Like that thought never crosses his mind. So one of the other things here that is mentioned in this paper is that this dude cherry picks facts to support a conclusion. He never considers all the possible reasons that certain numbers are moving in the same direction. It never occurs to him that a decline in organized religion and maybe a rise in certain types of violence might be caused by separate factors entirely. Sometimes he just blames atheists for no reason whatsoever. What is one thing? This is an interesting thing he said that I wanted to show you. He wanted to talk about alcohol. Where is this? Increased. Oh no, where did this part go? There we go. Look at this part that he cites right here. If I can, there we go. A plausible mediator between religious non-affiliation and rape is increased drug and alcohol use. As noted above, the non-religious are associated with increased drinking and illegal drug use. So and the increasing state-by-state trend toward recreational marijuana legalization may have accelerated this trend. As self-intoxication is often presented as a victimless crime, it is easy to believe atheists and agnostics feel free to partake once the element of religious self-regulation is removed. So because we don't have any morals, I guess, we might do pot and we might drink, and therefore ... rape happens. What the hell? This guy is just concluding things out of nowhere. Look at the last line in this paragraph. To put it another way, some non-religious men made a short moral step into substance use and then, in a diminished state of self-control, made a much larger one into criminality. However, he wants you to know he's totally not saying atheism causes this horrible stuff. It's such a bad paper, and this got published. So in that Religion News Service article, to their credit, they spoke with critics of all of this. They spoke to actual sociologists who understand this stuff. Like one sociologist, Ryan Cragen, he said that the paper ignores how states with higher murder rates are also correlated to higher per capita populations of evangelicals. And he actually quoted, Ryan Cragen said this, if I were to use this dude's logic, then I should be able to argue that evangelicals are more likely to kill people. But he wouldn't say that because that's not what the data shows. But if you want to play the correlation game, yeah, more guns, more evangelicals, those go together. I want to show you another thing here. If you haven't seen this before, I've sometimes given talks and I've used this in my talks. But another sociologist, Phil Zuckerman, has said this about atheism and morality. Look at this from an article in Salon, rather. In terms of who supports helping refugees, affordable healthcare for all, accurate sex education, death with dignity, gay rights, trans rights, animal rights, and as to who opposes militarism, the government use of torture, the death penalty, corporal punishment, and so on, the correlation remains. The most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference. Like, we are the moral ones. He also says this in the piece, when it comes to the most pressing moral issues of the day, hardcore secularists exhibit much more empathy, compassion, and care for the well-being of others than the most ardently God-worshipping. Such a reality is necessary to expose, not simply in order to debunk the long-standing canard that religion is necessary for ethical living, that you need God to be good, but because such exposure renders all the more pressing the need for a more consciously secular citizenry, one that lives in reality, embraces science and empiricism, and supports sound policies, not prayer, as a way to make life better, safer, and more humane. Love the article. Wonderful point. But that's the thing. If you want to compare religiosity and morality, pick the moral issue, and you will find atheists tend to be on the side that most people would consider to be the moral one, the one that gives rights to people, things like that. I asked Zuckerman about this, the paper, and one of the things he told me is, if it is true that secularization causes harm, then why don't we see the highest rates of rape and suicide in the highly secularized nations of Scandinavia, Estonia, Czech Republic, UK, Japan, etc.? Even if you look at Canada, he told me, the most secular province, British Columbia, does not have the highest crime rates. He told me the bottom line is that rape rates and suicide rates are caused by many, many factors: economic, cultural, political, psychological, historical, etc. And to pin any of that on secularization is absurd. There's one more thing to show you in that Religion News Service article. They broached all of this with True Scott, the guy who wrote that paper, and they're like, what if you're like wrong about your conclusions? Look at what this dude said about it all. In an interview, he claimed that if his research had linked greater incidents of suicide or sexual assault to more widespread religious beliefs, journals would have flocked to publish his study. The social science journals, they lean to the left politically, Drew Scott said. They're very anti-religious. That reminds me of the Stephen Colbert line, like reality has a well-known liberal bias. Like, dude, we already have the research that shows less religiosity, as I just showed you, leads to more morality. So, like, no, you would not be saying anything surprising. They would not have published your paper just because you came to that conclusion. That's not how papers work. True Scott said he's glad the paper is getting attention, even if it's negative attention, and hopes it leads to more study about the social implications of the decline of religion. To critics, he simply says, prove that I'm wrong. Like, what researcher is like, I'm going to put out a whole bunch of BS and it's your responsibility to explain why I'm dumb? Meanwhile, I'm just going to keep putting out my stupid, misguided statements. Like, that's something you expect from Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins these days. That prove that I'm wrong. Why did you publish this study that is wrong? That's the bigger issue here. There's a reason this dude's paper was not published in actual publications, but he had to go to like a Christian fake journal to get it published. So just, I think I'll stop there. Just a horrible paper, but I appreciate all the sociologists coming out and debunking it. All right, what questions we got here? It has been a continuing trope in Christian circles for a very long time that non-Christians have inferior ethics and increased crime. It is one of the truly toxic aspects of Christianity. Absolutely true. That is a trope. I have heard it for so many years, the idea that you need God to be good, even though none of the data backs that up. And if you look at the United States, the most awful things tend to happen because of what the religious people in power are doing. If you see any article about how they are harming women who need abortions, if you see all the mass shootings that are happening everywhere, why is that happening? Because like white evangelicals in power don't care about any of it. And they refuse to follow the data and they just go along with it. Again, name the issue of morality and you will see that religious nuts tend to be the people making it continue. And then they blame us for not having morality. Like, absolutely insane. And this is why I would also argue Democrats in power have a responsibility. I don't need them to be atheists, but I need them to take charge of the moral majority argument. We are the moral ones. Doesn't matter what your religion is. We know what's good for the rest of the country. Don't let them get away with that talking point, because every time they do it, everything gets worse, and it's about to for a long time. How are rates of assault and suicide connected to his institutions after fleeing or being shunned? I mean, it's a fair point that he didn't get into in his paper. But again, if you look at religious subcultures, denominations, how many like documentaries have we seen in recent years where not cult members, but people who grew up in evangelical Christian circles said they were assaulted because of what they got out of purity culture, that they were victims of abuse because they just believed their pastor and they were told never to question that person. The whole Catholic Church. Like, what the hell? How many institutions have these awful things gotten worse because they were following religious rules and not, whatever the data showed? Where did this article come from? I think I already covered that in the article. But again, it was published in a journal for the Journal of Sociology and Christianity, which is a Christian journal. And it was just recently published, like in the past couple of months. Amy Coney Barrett's father now sits on the Catholic Church's legal council. Is that right? He sits, I think he is a leader in their insulated religious group. I don't think he's the one who decides anything about SCOTUS. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett obviously gets a vote on which cases are heard. I don't think that's accurate, though, so I'm going to skip this comment because her father has no say over this. Thanks for that donation. Hey, Hemmant, tell Jess I said hi. Will do. Time to hang on to our butts. Also, Dawkins and Musk are the definition of main character syndrome. I am not looking forward to Elon Musk running our country for the next several years, but I don't know. Godspeed, President Musk. What else we got here? All right, I'm going to move on to a different story. Those were the two big ones I had to get through. Let me pull up some other stuff here. Give me one moment to untab everything. Okay. I wanted to make sure I showed you this. There is an Oklahoma lawmaker who is trying to put 10 Commandments monuments inside and outside the state capitol. And he tried this last year and it didn't work. And Oklahoma Republicans have been trying this for a long time. It never works, but this guy's trying again. The guy's name is State Senator David Bullard. And this is the bill he has already filed. It's Senate Bill 380. And I'm going to show you specifically the portion of the bill that addresses this. This is what he says in the bill. A monument of the Ten Commandments shall be prominently displayed and protected on the inside and outside of the Oklahoma State Capitol as a symbol of its historic significance for Oklahoman and American history. And everyone has to decide the date and the placement and the security. Yeah. Who cares? Only donated funds may be used for the design, placement, security, and construction. You can't move the monuments without approval of the state legislature. And any person who knowingly causes damage or destruction to the monuments shall be, upon conviction, guilty of a felony. So this is the bill that this dude wants to pass. 2 monuments, not just one, but 2 Ten Commandments monuments. When he tried this last year, the bill did not make it out of committee. I think he's trying this again because the Republican Party in Oklahoma has actually shifted, as if it were possible, even more to the right. And they're pretty much on the record of doing whatever Donald Trump and Ryan Walters want to do there. I think what's weird to me about this particular bill is this one's been adjudicated so many times before. Let me give you a rundown of how they've tried to do 10 Commandments monuments in the state of Oklahoma. In 2009, the governor at the time signed a law allowing there to be a 10 Commandments monument to go up outside the state capitol, just a standalone 10 Commandments monument. And they finally got it up there in 2012. And that was controversial, as you might expect. After that went up, the Satanic Temple said, well, we would like to donate our own monument outside the Capitol. And this is interesting, a religious zealot named Michael Tate Reed, he actually live streamed himself driving his car directly into the monument and destroying it. It was just fiasco after fiasco. And I think you saw that last line in the new bill that says if you vandalize it, you're going to be convicted of a felony. That's because this guy that ran his car into the monument in 2012, uh, he was eventually not charged with anything. I think they said he had mental health issues, so he got off without any charges. And then after that was like replaced, that monument was the subject of a lawsuit to take it down. And guess what happened? A district court judge actually said it could stay up. And this went all the way up to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And in 2015, they said, yeah, this standalone Ten Commandments monument is clearly unconstitutional, right? This is obviously promoting religion. It violates the Oklahoma Constitution. It obviously violates the US Constitution. And even after conservative lawmakers said, okay, we hear your decision, but we want you to do it again, the Oklahoma Supreme Court said, no, we were right the first time. And then, wait, we're not done yet. In 2016, Oklahoma voters had the chance to repeal the part of the state constitution that said you can't use taxpayer funds to promote religion. They had a chance to get rid of that from their constitution. And in Oklahoma, the voters said, no, you should keep that in there. We don't want taxpayer dollars promoting religion. Unbelievable how many times Republicans have tried to promote Christianity through the government and been foiled by the legal system, by voters, whatever. And so over the past couple of years, here's the big change we've seen. They have tried to shove the commandments in public schools. They have tried promoting Christian nationalism in other ways. Ryan Walters, the superintendent of public instruction, has paid for the Trump Bible to go in certain economics classes, government classes, I should say. This happens all the time now, so I think that's why they're trying to pass this bill again. Who cares what the law says? The law doesn't matter anymore. We're white Christians. We can get away with anything. I also want to show you that the guy who sponsored that bill, here's his history. Who is this guy? This is a guy who has repeatedly bragged about how he's hanging out with David Barton. Here, what a fantastic day joining with wall builders David Barton. And who's in that picture? State Senator David Bullard, among others. Here's another picture David Bullard was bragging about right here. I had the great pleasure of going to the Wall Builders Pro-Family Legislators Conference. We have listened to David Barton, Glenn Beck, and many others. Like, this dude just falls for the worst liars in the Christian world, the broader Christian universe, or whatever Glenn Beck is these days. I don't think it's Mormon anymore, is it? I don't know. But this is what the guy is listening to, who the guy is taking advice from. So, of course, he wants to do this. I think last year when he tried to pass this bill, he argued that the Ten Commandments monument had historic significance for Oklahoma. But that's a lie. Our nation wasn't built on Christianity. It was built in spite of Christianity and with an emphasis on religious freedom, right? As the saying goes, the word religion appears twice in the U.S. Constitution, and both times it is preceded by the word no. And Oklahoma state constitution is even more strict. So no, church-state separation is not violated. It is not fake. It is very much in these documents. So I don't know, even if they're successful, even if he's successful getting the monuments up, then what? What's going to change? Nothing's going to change because no one cares what the commandments say. As I've said many times before, 4 of the commandments are about Christianity specifically. Some of them it could be combined into one, as George Carlin has said. A number of important laws are not mentioned in the commandments. There's nothing about slavery in the commandments. So what's the point of this? It's a symbolic way to promote Christianity through the government under the guise of history and morality. That's what this is all about. They don't care about what the commandments say. They just want to use the government to promote their religion, and this is a way to do it. It sends a message to non-Christians and non-religious people in the state that you don't matter. You're second-class citizens. So, I don't know. There's one other interesting thing about this bill that this guy is promoting, which is that it says in his proposed law that if the Ten Commandments monument is challenged in court, the state's attorney general is authorized to prepare and present a legal defense of the display. Okay, but right now, the attorney general in Oklahoma is a guy named Gentner Drummond. And even though he's a Republican, he has been a surprising defender of church state separation in recent years. Do you remember in Oklahoma when they passed a policy allowing a Catholic charter school to receive taxpayer funding? Well, there was a lawsuit over that. That went in front of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And Gentner Drummond, the Attorney General of Oklahoma, was on the side of we should not allow this charter school to get taxpayer money because it's a religious school. And he won. So I find it hard to believe Gentner Drummond is going to defend the Ten Commandments monument. I'm also curious about this because Drummond just announced this week he's going to run for governor in 2026. And he's a Republican, so if he can get past the primary, he's probably going to win. But that's interesting given the state of the GOP, because I would be surprised if a guy who's this opposed to church-state separation, even as a Republican, gets the support of the party. That would be surprising to me. And like in terms of who should be the governor of Oklahoma, I don't know. Gentner Drummond doesn't sound like he would be the worst option if you had the choice. Maybe that comment will come and bite me in the ass in a couple of years. But for now, I just found that an interesting little quirk. Okay, I'm going to stop there with that story. What other questions we have? I love the irony of graven image that commands no graven images. Very true. Very good point about the Ten Commandments monument. They all want to worship it, even though they're not supposed to, because they haven't read what's on the monument. Any follow-up on that girl who apologized to her church? That was a story I did last week about an unwed woman, young woman, who was basically pressured to apologize in front of her church. I have not heard any updates. Last I heard, that family basically got away from social media because they were getting a lot of unwanted attention, which I get. But no, I have not heard any updates. Otherwise, I would tell you all about them. Sorry. I'm very curious, though, too. All right, sign up at the newsletter, please. I just got a couple more stories from you that I want to share. Let me pull this up here. Oh, this one's interesting. North Dakota Republicans are trying to force public school students to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I didn't even know we were still arguing about this, but they are in North Dakota. Here is the bill that they are trying to pass. It's House Bill 1222. It's introduced by a whole bunch of politicians. Every single one of them is Republican. And I want to show you certain passages of this bill, because here's what North here's what North Dakota's law says right now. Okay, let me show you this. Number 5 is the part that matters. A school board may authorize the voluntary recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance by a teacher or one or more students at the beginning of each school day. A student may not be required to recite the pledge, stand during the recitation of the pledge, or salute the American flag. Now, all of that makes sense to me. You can do the Pledge of Allegiance in public school. You can do it over the loudspeaker. You could have teachers or students lead the class in the pledge. But as this law says, no one has to say it. You can remain seated during it. As long as you're not disruptive while other people say it, you're fine. That's pretty much the law everywhere in the country when it comes to the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, what does this bill hope to do? It wants to change the section I am reading you right now. This part of the law, number 5, is what they want to change. Let me show you what the bill would change it to. Here's what the bill proposes. I know it's a lot here. Just notice what they're crossing out. Instead of saying a school board may authorize the voluntary recitation, it says a student of a public school shall recite the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of each school day. You got to say it. You don't want to? Too bad. A student must be informed by written notice. Okay, you got in the handbook or something else, it says it has to say you can be excused from saying the Pledge of Allegiance upon written request by the student's parent or legal guardian. This is interesting. Let's just talk about this for a second. The only way you can get out of saying the pledge, if this bill were to become law, is if your parents gave you permission to do it. Think about that for a second. Let's say I am in high school in North Dakota and I happen to be a 14, 15-year-old atheist. And I don't want to stand for the pledge because it says under God, and I don't believe we're a nation under God. You think I'm going to go to my parents and say, hey, mom, dad, I don't want to say the pledge. Also, I know I'm brown and I'm supposed to we're a good immigrant family. But I don't want to say the pledge. I want to stay seated. And also, by the way, I'm an atheist and that's why I don't want to say. You think any of that's going to fly? You think they're going to write me a permission slip to get out of doing that? No, they're not going to do that. Do you know how hard it would be for a student to have the support of their parents to take this rebellious act of not saying the pledge? Most of the students who would want to sit would not be able to get that permission. How many of your parents agree with your politics? Like, that's why they're doing this. They're saying, look, we're giving you an out. You don't have to say it, but we're making you overcome this giant hurdle, which, by the way, this has been litigated before. And like the courts have said, no, you don't need parent permission. If you don't want to say it, no one can force you to say it because the government can't force you to do something like that against your will. You don't need a permission slip to not do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. That's what the law says. But this law says, hey, kids, the only way you can get out of saying the pledge is if your parents write a note. Awful. Illegal. Shouldn't be doing that, but that's what they say. What else do we have in here? During the Pledge of Allegiance, any unexcused students, the ones who don't have a permission slip, you have to show full respect to the flag by standing at attention with your right hand over your heart. And for men, remove any headdress unless it's for religious purposes. And okay, fine, I'm going to let that part slide. But they're basically saying if you don't have a parent permission slip, you at the very least have to stand up and do this. You can't remain seated even if you only want to mouth the words. So that's what this bill would do. They're forcing kids to say the pledge against their will. And if you don't have opt-out permission, what are you going to do? I don't know what happens, by the way, if your parents do sign a permission slip. Let's say you are excused. What happens? Are you allowed to sit in the classroom while everyone else says the pledge? Is the teacher going to kick you out of the classroom saying, oh, little Billy's parents signed the pledge paperwork, so Billy, get out. You're not wanted in this classroom while the rest of us good people say the pledge. How much ostracization is there going to be for the students who get permission not to say it? I have no idea. The bill doesn't specify. What happens if a student who doesn't have a permission slip doesn't want to say the pledge? What if they remain in their seats? What is the punishment going to be for that student? Because right now, what they're doing by sitting down, that is legal. But if this bill were to pass, what punishment are they going to give to that kid? The bill doesn't specify any punishment. So is the school going to punish them for not saying the pledge? I don't know. It's very confusing because they haven't thought this thing through. It doesn't make any sense. One other thing I want to show you about this bill. Look at one other section here. I'm going to scroll up. In addition to them saying how we got to change the pledge, look at this section. Immunity from liability. Years ago, North Dakota passed a law basically saying, hey, schools, if you want to put up a 10 Commandments poster in the school, as long as it's part of a display with, the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence, you're allowed to do that if you want to. But when they passed that, they said in this law, the superintendent, school districts, schools, school boards, and individual school board members, and all these people involved, all the adults involved in a school, are immune from any liability for damages if anyone sues you over the 10 Commandments display thing. And this bill would amend that law to say, oh, and if they sue you over the Pledge of Allegiance, all of you are immune. It's like they know they're going to get a lawsuit over this from some parent. And they're trying to say, don't worry, school adults, none of you are going to be in trouble. Let the kids suffer. Doesn't matter. It's like they're anticipating the lawsuit already, right? Um, this is the kind of bill you file because you don't care about public education. You don't care about doing what's best for students. You file it because you're waging war with public schools while trying to make a political statement to an insane group of voters who claim to be patriotic while trying to destroy our democracy. I find the Pledge of Allegiance hilarious in part because if you actually love the country, you should not be forced to say a pledge to it and how much you love it. If someone had to say to me every day, I love you, but they were forced to do it under threat of punishment, I think all of us would understand, okay, that didn't really count. But that's what Republicans want. They think symbolic acts of patriotism done at knife point are the same as true patriotism because they don't understand what patriotism is. If Republicans ever did the sort of things that inspired people to actually love the country, maybe they would get it. But they've spent so many decades just trying to hurt as many different groups of people as possible. They have no clue what it's like when you actually inspire people to love the country. Now, look, I've made an entire podcast series about the history of the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll post a link somewhere, but just to give you some reasons why the Pledge of Allegiance is such a bad idea in general, let me just run through some of the big reasons. I already mentioned the Pledge of Allegiance says under God. That was added in 1954. It should not be there. It was put there for political reasons, but it says under God. If you're an atheist, you might not want to say a pledge that we are one nation under God, indivisible. And of course, the irony there is the pledge used to say we were one nation, indivisible, and then they decided to divide us with under God. But that's not the only reason. The pledge suggests falsely that we have liberty and justice for all. And as that is actually one reason that many Black students have protested the pledge, because they know that's not true. Another reason to not like the pledge is that the reason it was written in the first place, I'm sure you've heard the story about how the pledge was written by like a Baptist minister, and isn't that interesting? And he wrote it without under God. Well, guess what? That Baptist minister who wrote the pledge hated immigrants. He was not a good dude. And the reason the pledge says this at the beginning, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The subtext there is, hey, people coming to the United States from other countries, stop loving your flag. You're here now. You better like our flag, and you better not say anything nice about the flag of the country from where you came. Like, that's not okay. And frankly, the last reason you shouldn't like the pledge, the United States is not always a country that deserves admiration. We do a lot of really horrible shit around the world, and the rest of the world knows it, and they make fun of us for it. Rightly so, by the way. Every time you go to a foreign country and you tell them you're an American, and their reaction is like, oh no, ask them about it, because they'll tell you all the problems they have with America, and they're usually right about it. But like, why should we pledge allegiance to a nation that is so often a global embarrassment? I wish our country did things we could be proud of, but most of the time we are not doing that. And again, none of these North Dakota Republicans care. They want to force kids to fake their patriotism by reciting propaganda, religious propaganda, because their whole brand of MAGA-driven politics is incapable of earning that respect on their own merits. If you have to force someone to say they love the country, it doesn't count. And it's also a slap in the face to their history teachers, who apparently, I guess, have to say with a straight face, like, yeah, we're free in this country, and you're allowed to protest in this country, unless it comes to the Pledge of Allegiance, in which case you have to say it or else. I wanted to show you one other thing just about the Pledge of Allegiance, because I always find this fascinating. When I was doing research on that podcast series I made about the Pledge of Allegiance years ago, one of the stories I came across that I did not personally know about at the time, it was about a little boy named Hubert Eves, and he was 11 years old, and he was Black. And in 1916, over a century ago, This kid did not want to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and he got arrested for it. He was 11. He got arrested for it. And there was a whole article about this in the newspaper. Look at the headline here. I'll scroll up for a second. Hubert Eves refuses to salute U.S. flag. Youngster, 11 years old, starts new philosophy of American patriotism. And I want to scroll down and show you one thing here. There's Hubert right there. But look at this section right here. To a Chicago Defender reporter, look at what this kid said. He said, he's 11. Isn't it wrong to have me bowing and worshiping a flag that is a dirty flag? One that does not give my mother and father protection? A flag that represents a government that allows Jim Crow cars, segregation in all public places in the South and other parts of the country, denies us a voice in state government, and who practices grandfather clauses and lets mobs take our people out and hang them without trial, show us no mercy in the courts, deny us the proper school education, disfranchises our people, winks an eye at Southern concubinage, ostracizes us in every way. The Defender reporter was writing as fast as he could, but he had to stop and look at the boy and ask him about his parents. And young Eves said, I have a good mother and father, and I've been very obedient. I love that story. But also that kid from 1916 was absolutely right about all of that. Why would you want to pledge your allegiance to a nation that does all that stuff? It's horrible. So for now, this North Dakota bill that has been proposed, HB 1222, it has been referred to the House Education Committee. Interestingly enough, it's North Dakota. It's overrun with Republicans. On that committee are 14 members. 12 of them are Republicans, and 2 of them are co-sponsors of this bill, including that committee's chair, which means this bill will probably get voted on, and it might get up to the House, and there's a very good chance this bill could pass. So this could be an issue months down the line. We'll see. All right, I'm going to pause there. I have one more story for you after this, but what questions we got? So this opens up grounds for shame, peer pressure, and bullying. Absolutely right. Like, if you have to sit out of the classroom or stay seated while the pledge is happening, yeah, you're going to be outcast. And it's not cool for schools to do that to children as young as kindergarten. For whatever the reasons are. By the way, I should have mentioned this. The original lawsuits to say we should not have to say the Pledge of Allegiance did not come from atheists, did not come from Black students. It came from Jehovah's Witnesses who said, I have a religious obligation not to worship false idols, and the flag is an idol. I don't want to worship that. And so they're the ones who got the victory in the Supreme Court in the 40s? I think it's the 40s. A bunch of, thank you, Jehovah's Witnesses, atheist parents like mine, and some First Nation people would definitely write permission letters. And you know what? That's great. But also, no one should have to get their parents to write permission letters to get out, for their kids to get out of saying the pledge. You should not have to do that. Kids should be allowed to make up their own minds about the pledge. I think it's fair to say if you don't want to say the pledge, you don't have to. Stay seated, be respectful. Don't disturb anyone else, but no one should make you say it against your will or even stand up and put your hand over your heart. No, it's the same thing. I thought Republicans didn't want schools making decisions on behalf of parents without express consent from the parents, not an opt-out of our policy system. That's a very good point. Republicans are all for small government unless it involves something they totally want you to do, in which case they're going to force you to do it. And also, if your parents disagree about it or something, well, guess what? They don't care about what you think. They're only working on behalf of white evangelical Christian parents who don't want their kids learning condoms and, I don't know, same-sex marriage exists. Sounds like they want to make a case to make it to SCOTUS to overrule students' rights. That's possible that this is where this is going. Usually with this Supreme Court, they don't like cases that are so blatantly illegal. Like, this one is almost more to do with freedom of speech than religion. And so I don't know that this is the case you would want to do uh, if you want to make kids say the pledge. Like, but it's true. They're probably doing this because they think they can get away with it. They're pushing this bill for the same reason Louisiana Republicans passed a law to put the 10 Commandments in public school classrooms, because they thought they could get away with it. And they hope this gets up to the Supreme Court. And in Louisiana, so far, they've been unsuccessful, but they have appealed the decision. And so we haven't heard the final say yet. So yeah, it's a fair point. Maybe North Dakota Republicans are doing this because they just hope the Supreme Court will come around and say, yeah, kids, you got to say the Supreme Court, say the Pledge of Allegiance because freedom. Wish I could remember where I saw it, but that woman has a lot of supporters who are raising money for her and throwing her a baby shower. You're talking about the woman who was forced, the unwed mother who was forced to apologize for getting pregnant in front of her church. I have not seen this. I don't know if these people raising money for that woman and throwing her a baby shower, I don't know if that money is getting to the family or if they're willing to accept it or if they're willing to go to a baby shower on her behalf, because that's what the pastor said they shouldn't do. So if you do see that, please send me any links that might be relevant. All right. I got one last story for you. Let me pull this up really quick. This may be a short story, but I wanted to give you an update on something I mentioned last week. Last week, I talked about how West Virginia has a water development authority, and not long ago, they approved a $5 million grant. And that money is supposed to be given to groups that say, hey, we can help the state with water infrastructure, building pipes and sewer lines and stuff to make sure everyone in West Virginia has good, clean water. And they gave $5 million to an Ohio school. Ohio neighbors West Virginia, but they gave money to an Ohio school called the College of St. Joseph the Worker, where you can learn a trade, earn a degree, and graduate without crippling debt. And this is a brand new school. It just opened in the fall. They don't have a track record of success or anything like that. So why did they get $5 million? Well, as I mentioned last week, their grant application said, we're going to use this money to basically train students to do water stuff, and maybe they'll come back to West Virginia. But also we want to make dorms. We want to build dorms in Ohio to recruit students. And we want to spend $1 million to create like a lobbying arm that works to push anti-abortion policies in West Virginia. Like, what does that have to do with water? I have no clue. But they were getting $1 million to basically push anti-abortion propaganda across state lines. Like, none of that made any sense, but the state of West Virginia approved that $5 million grant request. And one of the things that was also weird is that the director of the Water Development Authority, her name is Marie Prezioso, she was supposed to get paperwork, because the only way you can give a grant like that is with the approval of a cabinet member in the state of West Virginia. And she said verbally they gave her permission to give the grant, but then when like local reporters said, "Hey, where's the paperwork where the cabinet member signed off on this grant?" she actually said, "We do not have one on file." They never gave her that one. So all of that was pretty messed up. And now the reason I'm bringing all this up again is because there is some breaking news on this, which is that the ACLU of West Virginia and the American Humanist Association, they have filed a lawsuit against the West Virginia Water Development Authority to stop them from giving this $5 million to this Catholic school that's based in Ohio. So that is good news. Though I wanted to show you the very opening of this lawsuit because it's just really important that you see this. This is the beginning of their lawsuit. Tens of thousands of West Virginians wonder each day where they will get clean water, as it does not run out of the taps in their homes. The defendant in this case, the West Virginia Water Development Authority, is tasked with providing financial assistance to communities to improve and protect water quality, protect public health, and encourage economic growth. The case at hand arises from their abdication of that duty, where it instead provided $5 million of West Virginian taxpayer money to this Catholic college and out-of-state Catholic school. In doing so, the defendants in this case violated the guarantee of freedom of religion codified in the West Virginia Constitution, and the plaintiff respectfully seeks the intervention of this court. And this is really an amazing lawsuit because the only thing they are arguing in here is that the West Virginia Constitution has this statement in it. This is it. Article 3, Section 15 says, no man shall be compelled to frequent or support. I'm going to skip ahead to, let me get rid of this for a second. This is the part that matters. The legislature shall not prescribe any religious tests whatsoever or confer any peculiar privileges or advantages on any sect or denomination. And the people of any district in the state basically should not have to use taxes for the erection or repair of any house of public worship or for the support of any church or ministry. So the West Virginia Constitution says you can't use taxpayer money to promote religion, and the taxpayers of West Virginia should know that none of their money is going toward the support of any church or ministry. And yet, the West Virginia Water Development Authority is giving $5 million of taxpayer money, including the taxpayers of West Virginia's money, to a Catholic school to do Catholic things that have nothing to do with water. That is the argument this lawsuit is making. All right. It also says that the Water Development Authority issued this grant intentionally, knowingly, willingly, wantonly, maliciously, and in reckless disregard of the constitutional rights of West Virginians. And this is what the American Humanist Association said about all this in the press release, because the American Humanist Association is the group that is suing on behalf of their members in West Virginia. The ACLU of West Virginia is providing the lawyers for their side. But look at what AHA's executive director, Fish Stark, said. We are proud to take a stand on behalf of our members in West Virginia because no one should have to pay taxes to fund someone else's religion. Humanists believe deeply in the freedom of conscience, and this attempt to force West Virginia taxpayers to fund religious activity is an offense against the Constitution and common sense. As a former West Virginia resident, I believe mountaineers are always free means your faith is your business, no one else, and certainly not the government has the right to push it on you. Beautifully said. Now, what happens here? I don't necessarily know how this ends, but I did want to leave you with one hope, one bit of optimism here, which is that according to a local newspaper, this case was just assigned to a circuit court judge named Richard Lindsay. And I was curious about who this judge is. And here's what I can tell you. He was just elected in November. But from 2018 to 2022, Richard Lindsay was a state senator, and he was one of the only Democrats in the state legislature. He was one of those rare Democrats in West Virginia politics. And in 2022, he ran for re-election, and he lost his bid for re-election. And last year, he decided to run for circuit court judge. And this past November, he won that race. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to rule one way or the other. But if you're hoping that a judge who looks at this case cares about church-state separation and respects the state's constitution, I mean, this guy looks pretty good on paper. So I will say I'm optimistic about this. I don't know what good my prediction is going to do here, but we'll pay attention to this and see where it goes. But hopefully the American Humanist Association, with the help of the ACLU of West Virginia, can put a stop to this $5 million going to a Catholic school in Ohio before it's too late, and maybe use that money to actually benefit the people of West Virginia and help them with make sure they're getting clean water. All right, I'm going to stop there with this story. What other questions we got? That's it. Okay, so next week I will be here on Thursday night, not Friday night. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful week. please support this channel by going to patreon.com/Hemant. And thank you so much to Den for helping me out with moderation. You can always go to friendlyatheist.com to support the work I do as well. I think that's it. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.